And he who can weep can hope, for the blood around the heart is the thought of men. That epigraph, which begins my last book, is from Lev Shestov and Empedocles. I'd like to start with a new poem. One drop upon a rusted leaf is torn from broken eyes. It sits apart from memory. The heart will need its lies and glean the fictive and its truth. Though both's a broken shard, where is inexperience for heart so wildly hard? A flower cups one tear to lend the day its hue. Where does the flower weep? The night shed on its dew. There is a wall, a furtive wall, bluely dark in among the hills. Come rest your thought, leave behind the wills, then go beyond, bring your human ills. I signal now a poising call, there beyond the furtive wall. When I have gathered in the night, who can time the clocking hours? Who can time where day begins? When I have gathered in the night, when I have stalked from space to space in all compartments of my heart, who can time the clocking hours? Who can tell the tolling time in all the rooms where I reside and lie myself to sleep at night, and lie myself to sleep at night in all compartments of my heart? By way of program notes, I always think it's a good idea at a poetry reading to say what's going to happen. We're going to do this evening shortly. I'm going to make believe it's a cello recital because that's my favorite instrument, and it's going to be less than an hour. There'll be no intermission. Rather, there'll be perhaps an occasion when I'm going to sneak backstage and take a break just for a moment or two, because the emotion of reading poetry, I think, for the audience as well as for the poet, it's too condensed and too compressed. And I think that a short break is called for. In the Bronx, we call that schnapps. My favorite form is the four-line lyric. They come quickly. They're almost unchangeable. This one is called Loitering Hill. The other day, near Loitering Hill, green by the grass and pranced review, I saw my past and pondered why it was to be my future too. Over a decade ago, I had the privilege of traveling alone in the hill towns of Tuscany and Umbria. And I came upon, traveling on a dirt road, and I came upon a stream called Nestor. And I was quite struck by such an august name. And I did what every sane human being should do. I stopped, got out a copy of Horace, made no attempt to read it, put it under my head as a pillow, put a flower in my ear, and fell asleep. And Robert Frost came to visit me. He really did. And this poem is called A Chance Conversation with Robert Frost. In the beginning, it tells the story of what I just said. And then he talks briefly, and I've never been sure whether he was curt or pleasant in what he says. And then I respond at greater length because it's my poem. And it ends with one word of Frost from his famous poem, Birches. It's called A Chance Conversation with Robert Frost. To the fields of Tuscany I'd go, where no language barriers appear, a hilltop higher to a mountain ridge, where I walk in the same field of yellow, and I drink from the same waterfall, while my old friend the cuckoo reassures, farmers are farmers, daffodils yellow, apple blossom still blossom whitest white. I have never seen a more gentle place, though I think I've been here many times, by an old, old stream the map calls Nestor. Do you believe in coincidence? Horace provides the sweetest of pillows, and one yellow buttercup in my hair. I drift away in Tuscany. Poet, still alone. What are you doing here? What's here in a field on a mountain top by old streams of Tuscany? I remember a more gentle time, so languished by fleeted memory. I had picked nameless ones and sprigs of apple blossoms that blossomed whitest white. Over there, beyond the stream called Nestor, past the daisies, a swinger of birches climbing limb by limb up a chestnut tree, proud as only a young boy is smug when he's climbed the top of the tallest one. A fertile time in a fertile field, when not yet smitten by puberty or Romulus's fraternal night. He doesn't know he's climbed his highest height. Oh, you were right. I think you were right. I don't know where it's likely to go better. Untitled and in 5 lines. Now time drips in world's wine by the weeds of inanition, which skive my soul pouring down. Rutting things shed themselves like a craning vine in keening soil. And also untitled and in 2 4-line stanzas. The trees in gentle umbrage swayed, determined times no perch to loiter. The dancing fears were unallayed, the soul was weary of the slaughter. Dreams were real, the real were dreams, and all beside I might have seen. The heart won't mistress to the mind. My heart's not mistress to my mind. A pilgrimed soul. There is a, what I call a kind of 20th century craziness that we have to give references today. Poetry books come out, there are notes in the back, and it says rosy-fingered dawn, Homer reference. I'm exaggerating a little, but something of that type. So I will acknowledge Pilgrim Soul. You all know the Yeats reference, of course, immediately. The problem I have with that is that the Yeats reference really references the Mrs. Browning reference from 50 years before, and I'm sure it could be traced beyond that. I think of Eliot's comment that the good poet steals and the poor one imitates. But I even have a problem with that because Aristotle, I'm sure you remember, said that poetry is mimetic art. So the good poet steals, the good poet imitates, and I think of Picasso's comment that the artist should shut up. And so I'm going to read A Pilgrim's Soul. It does also steal a remark from Sigmund Freud, who expressed a point that I think in the Occidental culture is a complicated one. He said that it takes a lot of sophistication to believe in coincidence. A Pilgrim's Soul. There is a time of unsweet regress. Who then believes in coincidence with sophistication beyond our years? Temptation rises to hate that womb and stay the time when I appeared to love the world in innocence. That bloated carnage scowls me mute, and what innocence dared not demand cast round my scanned and pilgrimed soul. I believe I can state that the next poem, after which I know I'm going to split for about 2 moments, is a terrific poem. It's an extraordinary poem, and it's a superb poem. And I can say all those things because it's not mine. It's written by a Greek girl, a 19-year-old Greek girl, probably during the 4th century BC, although I think it was earlier. It's a lament by the poet Erinna for her dead girlhood friend Baucis. The ancients regarded Erinna as second only to Sappho among women poets. The translation has been lost for 2,000 years. And in 1928, 5 little fragments making, I believe, 54 lines approximately, of which only 20 are complete lines, were discovered. What you're going to hear is the first poetical translation into a modern language. There are prose translations by Maurice Bauer and D.L. Page, but to my knowledge, this is the first translation into poetry. The translation was done in collaboration with Marilyn B. Arthur, who had shown me the lament shortly after my mother had died. And as with Erinna's friend Baucis, there were no obsequies in the case of my mother. So I came to the translation out of need for the poem, which is the way the Earl of Roscommon back in the 17th century recommended translations being done. But please, let's not think of this as an antiquarian work. The best art is always modern, in the best sense of the word, and by that I mean timeless. If you think of a hand of El Greco, what could be more modern today? Or the Opus 109, or the Gross Fugue. I don't really know what those words mean. I know that Erinna's poem, for me, is timeless. There are a few things that may be obscure. We can do them very quickly. They could be learned in 20 or 30 minutes with a good reference book. I'm going to tell them to you and then forget about them. And let Erinna speak herself to you. She died of grief less than a year after writing this lament. One, there is a reference to Mormo. Mormo was the boogeyman in ancient Greece. But the boogeymen in ancient Greece were female. And Mormo, which is the Greek word, and it was suggested that it be changed and it would not, Mormo means more mother. And we get from Mormo quickly to mama. And right away we're hearing what I consider poetry and lyrical and repetition and rhythm and rhyme. And it seems to me that the very first word we speak goes this way when we're at the breast and we're newborn, and quickly becomes mama, which quickly, if you get too much of it and it's changeable, as Erinna tells us in the poem, it becomes more ma or more mo. Hymen is, of course, the god of marriage. Aphrodite is, of course, the goddess of love, Venus in the Latin. And then there's a reference to the tortoise. The tortoise is a little more complicated, and I'll just take one moment and explain it to you. It's a ring game played by pubescent girls. It appears in Anatole France's Tortoise and in many, many sources. But it was already ancient when Erinna was writing 2,500 years ago. And I'm going to tell you the ring game which I've typed out. So if you'll now go back with me and make believe it's maybe 100 years after the first performance of Oedipus Rex, approximately, and you're in the South Aegean, and there's a group of pubescent girls sitting around in a circle, and the one that's in the middle is it. That's the tortoise. And the girls say, and it never changes, the girls say, "Tortoise, little tortoise, what are you doing in the middle?" And the tortoise says, "I'm winding my wool and yawn from my leisure." The girls say, "Your little one, how did he die?" And the tortoise says, "From white horses he sprang into the sea." Erinna's lament to Baucis. Deep into the wave you raced, leaping from white horses, whirling the night on running feet. But loudly I shouted, "Dearest, you're mine." Then you, the tortoise, skipping, ran to the rutted garth of the great court. These things I lament and sorrow, sad Baucis. These are for me, O maiden, warm trails back through my heart. Joy, once filled, smolders in ash. Young in rooms without a care, we held our miming dolls, girls in the pretense of young brides, and the toward dawn mother, lotted wool to tending woman, calling Baucis to salt the meat. Oh, what trembling when we were small, and fear was brought by Mormo, huge of ear upon her head, with 4 feet walking, always changing from face to other. But mounted in the bed of your husband, dearest Baucis, you forgot things heard from mother, while still the littler child. Fast Aphrodite, set your forgetful heart. So I lament, neglecting though your obsequies. Unprofaned, my feet may not leave, and my naked hairs not loosed abroad. No lighted eye may disgrace your corpse. And in this house, oh my Baucis, purpling shame grips me about. Wretched Erinna, 19, I moan with a blush to grieve. Old woman voice the mortal bloom. One cries out the lamenting flame, Hymen, O Hymenaeus, while the night whirls unvoiced, darkness is on my eyes. And I'm going to disappear for about 40 seconds. I promise no more. Having mentioned the Earl of Roscommon, for those of you who may be interested in translations, I should state, and I meant to, that I very much followed the rules that he laid down in his 17th century essay on translated verse. I've read a lot written since then that hasn't made much sense to me. And I've read very little, frankly, that adds to what also known as Wentworth Dillon had to say. And the 17th century essayist, as you know, wrote in couplets. He said wonderful things also like, when on some things poets have us, though on some things poets have us look, it still be garbage, though by Homer cooked. I wouldn't sell the 17th century short. But now I'd like to move to a different world. This poem is a new poem in the troubadour narrative tradition as exemplified by many, many poets since the beginning of time, and certainly by Helen Adam today. I'd like you to go back with me to once upon a time, perhaps in the time of Giselle, when the better class of peasants had a sealed beaming if they were a better class peasant. And I'm using the word sealed as in not the cask of the Amontillado. This poem is called The Sky in an Auburn Haze. With cattle lowing to the hills, the sky in an auburn haze, a girl delights in her peasantry, and the man would dance to a gaze. Her room was sealed, though night was quick, and the moon flowed down the path. The flower was shone of an ancient ache, and the stars despaired for her laugh. The boughs were veiled and spreading green. The path was short forever now. The woman halted infinitely to the music of a lowing cow. But he loved as the wind where he listed she'd sigh, dark as the late of night, where the moon has soothed the sky. Between Erinna and that poem, we seem to be in a section of what I call women poems. This is called Midnight and a Rambling Sky, and the word wait is used in as to wait for someone, not the weight of a stone. Lady, I cannot say I'm pleased with me as I par the gap of age and youth, and I wander in the weight of night, and I wonder where the wrong began. Lady, if we could now just have met, and time were back to younger time, but love defaults to a rambling sky. The stars lean down and quietly laugh. That is indubitably the poem of a middle-aged male. I'd like to share a sonnet with you. That's called A Letter from the Virgin Isles, and I ask that you consider the first 13 lines of the sonnet as a letter. It actually appears in quotes in the book. And the last line as a sarcastic comment on the poet. Me. This is a sonnet from the Virgin Isles, a letter from the Virgin Isles. When you have resolved what it is you want and can think of me in the tender time, then I'll come to you in the tender time and hold trembling hand to a trembling hand. But now you live in another's house and walk with him in another's house, yet cling to me with a trembling hand and surprise the fierceness of my heart. Give up this thought, leave me be. Love, I say, is a Catholic thing. Affairs are not by love construed, as other than the world has known. Conduct your way. Compose yourself. Woman, I say, don't come when time is terse. He keeps the woman while I hold the verse. And with apologies, well, listen, I don't want you to think life is really hard out here in poetry land. I think of a comment of Thomas Wyatt, so I'm sure you all know, was a wonderful sonneteer and perhaps the first sonneteer. I assume Shakespeare admired greatly. I believe that. In addition to his many wailing, weeping poems, he also said, ha, 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 and I am free, now I have my liberty. So there's other sides. With apologies to Hardy for his Midnight on the Great Western and The Journeying Boy, this is a 4-line lyric called The Journeying Girl. Go ramble in the lolling hills, yet stay with me this gruffing night. You neighbored love, O journeying girl, in the fretted surface of the day. In the wait of night, and wait again is to wait for someone. I, by a lake, face a scouring sky, and think of the time when love lay by, my love lay by, delightedly eating, wine we were drinking, when I and my love faced the scouring sky, the scouring sky. Now I, on my back, with a book to delight, think of hours to come in the wait of night, listlessly dreaming and noteworthy seeming. I'll think of a time when love lay by, my love lay by. The Remaindermen. It's a lovely old word. Lost now except for legal wills, I guess, and all that stuff that lawyers do, and it'll probably disappear completely. And I worry when we debase a language and change it radically, and debase a coinage. I think when both happen, we debase a culture. But in any event, this is called the Remaindermen. Forgive the Remaindermen, whose hireling hearts are now beyond the time of turning back, whose besieging hearts are appositioned to the backward years. And dream, oh dream now and then, of a time when love believed, and no one asked why the commitment to soft her. I've always been struck, speaking of Remaindermen, by the fact that the ancients had two different words for the poet. There obviously was the poeta nascitur poet that we all know from our high school days, but there also was the vatus vati, as in Horace's famous phrase, genus irritabili vatum. The vatus was more of the seer. And I'm going to do the inexcusable thing at the Guggenheim of disappearing and reappearing as a vatus vati. And I'm going to read 5 poems that are in the tradition of the vatus vati, rather than the more intimate tradition of the poet. The fact that we do not have 2 separate words for it anymore says something in itself, I suspect. I'm only going to read 5 poems of this type, and I start with a sonnet. Let time, in disparagement of days, inure the soul that yearns to exceed through regions of loss and little praise, where jackdaws winging caw the sky and stult the cuttings of the blessed. The easy ones are blessed, they say, not caught between 2 days, they say, when nighttime grackles wander wide and strut with pleasure's their behest. Birching sentinels arch unaware as enrages claims define the field. Bold shrubs align this blurting sphere. O time, who loafs to lose oneself, how different is the discourse of today. How different is the discourse of today? I'm going to stop the poetry reading now and talk for 2 minutes, which is because I just need to, and I think that's what poetry is about. I was struck by 25 words in Gabriel Marquez's 1983 Nobel Laureate Address in Literature. This year, I think it appeared in the New York Times in February. He says the following, which I've typed out for you, and I'm quoting from Marquez. For our crucial problem has been a lack of conventional means to render our lives believable. This, my friends, is the crux of our solitude. Now, in my 1977 book, there appears an epigraph that deals with solitude. Because poets are sneaky fellows, I wanted to help out, which is probably a foolish thing to do. And in the middle of the book, there appears an epigraph written in 1720 by Giambattista Vico. And it is no coincidence that Leibniz and Newton, in my opinion, it's no coincidence, were separately discovering or inventing calculus at the same time as Vico says the following. And I'm quoting, in the second barbarism, after the attempt at democracy, though they throng together, they will live like wild beasts in a deep solitude of spirit, and will scarcely any two of them be able to come to understanding, like base savages under soft words and embraces. In between Marquez's comment, which I think is desperately important, there isn't a day when I read the paper, and I think it holds true for all of us. There's a meeting I noticed taking place this week of a group of writers, including Grass, who wrote the wonderful Tin Drum, and they're discussing what is the writer's function in an endangered world. Is the world endangered? Are we just getting, we meaning me in the monarchical, poetical sense, getting middle-aged? Or is something really different? Does Marquez know what he's talking about? In between Marquez's comment, I'm suggesting that solitude is a different thing. And I'm going to read some poems that ERINNA would not have understood. The Greeks would not have understood the concept of solitude as we understand it today. The second barbarism after the attempt at democracy, if it is a different kind. In between Marquez's comment and Vico's comment, we had what Bertrand Russell referred to as the false optimism of the 19th century. I just gave you a fast shuffle, but that's the best I can do without being too fatuous. But I would like to suggest that that false optimism ended when Siegfried, the callow Siegfried, drinks the cup in Götterdämmerung. At least for me it did. Stefan George dates the end of innocence, and his wonderful essay, World of Yesterday, his memoir rather, as World War I, but date it whenever you want. The fact is that in 1928 a man wrote, "Everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned." And you all know, of course, the reference to Yeats. He was not speaking of World War II. And in 1934, a wonderful poet named Mandelstam, referring not to Russia, that is a misreading, in my judgment, but to the entire Greco-Judeo-Christian culture as a great beast whose spine had been smashed by beautiful, pitiful age. This poem was written in April of 1982, and it references no ideology and no nation. I wonder how many people in this room doubt that we are now beyond ideology. Though a shooting sprout of spring begins, and a prescient sleep of bulbs is fled, a silence settles upon the earth. In a quiet of mere momentum, all sigh a scream of never again, and silence settles upon the earth, blossom by blossom upon the earth. Though spring is now, there's no idea for occurring day, and silence settles upon the earth, blossom by blossom upon the earth. Even now, the russet winds blow over and over the lanky field. Long since the banking geese heel and the tiny snows stray into and out the promenade of trees, while grass receives the whitened shame, acquiesced into the violet same. Now the unkind flourish. In a babble world of loving our self-love, I cannot hear you. Fatigued inertia fortifies the new religion, and benumbed by an impercipient age, we are led by those we lead. Not even old doubting Dante is relevant, as the craven pursue the license of the self. Only the unkind flourish when mere thought leaves the floating words. This is called In the Second Barbarism, and the reference obviously is from Vico's comment. I don't know whether I'm making sense. Poets are always accused of being elliptical. I deserve that doubly, I guess. But in the second barbarism, again the sun runs round our earth. As gorged with import we demand the scrubbings of our authority, but emergings of the towered self and stiflings of mediocrity. We'd grasp the sureness of opinion and expunge the doubting of the soul, and then obviate the obvious, that we are formed of formlessness. I believe that poets should be in the business of questions, not answers. It's one thing to have a vision. It's another thing quite to be a visionary. And as I'm sure we all know, many fine poets have gotten into a lot of trouble being visionaries. But the question of how does one individual live is one that I think has to be asked. I was in Ireland for a month 2 years ago. I took a tramp freighter trip to South America in the spring. And wherever I go, it doesn't matter where, When I get away from the fancy cities, the upper middle class urban environment, I find people asking questions, and it's always the same question. It always deals with solitude, and it always deals with fear, and it always deals with something different. And it never deals with anything, by the way, that Ortega Gasset didn't write about in his book, Revolt of the Masses. But I would like to share with you just one sentence of Huizinga's that I've written down because I think it's very important. Every epoch sighs for a better world. The more profound the despair caused by the chaotic present, the more intimate is the sigh. I leave philosophy ultimately as, for the philosophers, as Turgenev said, they would catch truth by the tail. And here's two four-line lyrics, the first of which is quite new. Clumbering in the umbered night, isolate near the veiling dawn, stumbling to the wanting sky, here in the heart of solitude. In this poem, the word tumbril is used, and I'm sure you all remember the tumbril was in 1789 when they took him to the guillotine. They used a tumbril cart and tumbled him out of it. I also see it, if I may just say, as somewhat not unlike in the second book of Don Quixote when they're taking the poet or whatever he is, as we each see it, and he's bound and gagged because he's quite mad, and they're taking him back in the cart. And there's two members of the bourgeois, the grand bourgeois, which is the right, proper way to live, I think. And one turns to the other and says, and what is more dangerous than to be a poet? It is, as some say, an incurable and infectious disease. Unparented by the blurting world, things disorient the plunging sky, and weary to bed I take my thoughts. In tumbrilled night I desperate lie. Sonnet in the War Meter. The title is punning on the ancients' use of hexameter as the war meter. They used pentameters, we all know, for other purposes. If I write a poem, is it not mine to keep? Do I really have to share it, intruded on? Unsharing. I'm an expert at living alone and dueling with slow silence in the thorough day. Euphony loved and book cared, though empty delight. I'm not at all sure I'd want to be with me. I have many thoughts I no longer share, since he secreted them to a distant time. He carried off my secrets to a garish maze, no less unkind, not knowing he'd impaired. Exposed as Isaac, I stood upon a stage, and laughter besieged, I began to live unshared. Do we all share such secrets when we failing care? Do I live alone and unsharing share? Paul Goodman once wrote, I think he was a very good poet. If he had told people less often how good he was, he might be better regarded today. He once wrote that man must have a system of meanings, even if, or especially if, he does not understand it. I'm going to close with three poems that deal with the same subject of the individual living and the question of solitude as I perceive it, as I feel it. Untitled. In a sea-dreamed cloister house, lived by the walls of the night, lived with the fear of a fear and the turfside clashings. In a sea-dreamed cloister house, lived of a time dismembered, lived with the old sea lashings, and no one to answer. In a sea-dreamed cloister house, lived, though the night remembers, and unruffled flows the sky above the draggled beach. And the next to the last poem I'm going to read, and if you'll forgive, we come to the end of the evening, if you'll forgive my Bronx humor, I think it was Spengler who said that when the children of the bourgeois turn to crafts, the end is near. So the end of the reading is near. Primitive, in my perpetual dawn, I seek the sea edged by a sundry sky, and flail-watered notions that tyrannize, and monstrous bankrupt the lovelier word. Give way of theories, they destroy the wise. Accede back through the eloquent heart. Give in to the clouds in the awesome day, curl in the sea at the edge of the sky, while tedious license stifles the past, ignoring music that inures the heart, ignoring mere language seems to have thought. Let the freer declaim, mediocre, on the trolling sea drained of denizen, primitive to my perpetual dawn. And the last poem of the evening is called Bird in Flight. Perhaps it deals with the time since Siegfried drank his cup of celebrity, if you'll allow me the use of a metaphor. And the individual would be beyond doubting that he was in control of his own destiny and himself. I find that a remarkable thought. Perhaps it's the struggle of one individual, one poet, on the eve of the 21st century. I'm not sure I know. My favorite comment on poets is Swift's comment, fiction is their trade. It's in 4 stanzas, and it makes apologies to Dante for his phrase, look and pass, which is what I think all of you are going to do. I don't know another answer, and I do not exempt myself. But look and pass seems to be a significant issue. At the risk of taking, I want to tell you a story. I think I'm being indulgent at this point. I probably am. But I want to tell you about a conversation that took place before Ortega y Gasset wrote The Revolt of the Masses. If you go back to the 1920s with me, Goldsworthy, who was a novelist, of course, goes to visit the younger writer, Thomas Hardy, and he gives him a photograph of course, Goldsworthy, being the older writer, right? And he writes on it some writing, which, of course, is Goldsworthy. And what he writes is the following, and I've typed it out for you. The optimist, this is from the Inn of Tranquility, the optimist appears to be one who cannot bear the world as it is, and is forced by his nature to picture it as it ought to be. And the pessimist is one who can not only bear the world as it is, but loves it well enough to draw it faithfully. Hardy, commenting on this, the novelist who in the American tradition would be Melville, who switched to poetry, says the following, One need not love it. One may be indifferent to the world. Why are people always talking about pessimism? In the past, the poet was not labeled that way. In the past, he was allowed to write as he thought and felt. I close with bird in flight. Dear little bird, flown from the wildings of her hair, as a gift of time that wends, glisk with delight to gentler song. In the drift of time the way begins, and time unfolds, and time descends. Dear little bird, so zealous in refulgence, lilting streams and tumbling voids, drenching rocks soon pleat the night. In the drift of time the way begins, and time unfolds, and time descends. Dear little bird, why disquieted though tempted? Why arrogated to dismay? With lamentation look and pass. In the drift of time the way begins, and time unfolds, and time descends. Dear little bird, free solitary, spirit alone, unbound probate, homeless on the earth, fly, oh fly, on wings of weakness, fly, frail Jeremiah, probate of time. Dear little bird, time unfolds and time descends. In the drift of time, the way begins, and time unfolds and time descends. Thank you.